Hi, folks. My name is Dean Gould, and I'm from MedConnect 180. And today I'm going to address the age old question, or I'm going to partially address the age old question: can pharmaceutical reps transition into medical sales? And the short answer is absolutely yes. But it's a much more complex question to that. We're all aware of the bias that exists out there against hiring pharmaceutical reps into the medical sales industry. And next week, we'll have someone on the podcast that is going to delve into that deeper and answer some of those questions. And in our course, the Medical Sales Playbook, we delve into those questions as well as provide a guidebook and solutions on how pharmaceutical reps can transition over to medical sales, as well as people from B2B sales and others that want to get in. But it comes to mind, brings to mind, my career as a manager. Early in my management career, I had the bias, I'll admit. Don't shoot the messenger. I mean, I didn't create the bias, and the bias, I don't promote the bias. But at that time, I was mentored by some of the great managers in the industry, and they had the bias, and I picked up the bias. And it wasn't until a little bit later, at a point when my son was born with what we thought was a cardiovascular issue, and I was traveling the Western United States with another great company called Carbomedics, a heart valve company. And I was traveling the whole Western US and traveling every week, and sort of panicked. And I was at a funeral, unfortunately, for a guy by the name of Scott Storch, one of the great recruiters in Southern California back in the day. And Scott died on the tennis courts, and was at his funeral. And at the end, there was just a whole group of managers and people in the industry that loved Scott, like myself, and were there to pay tribute to him. And some folks were asking me about what I was up to. And I mentioned the fact that I was looking to not travel anymore due to my son. Now, the good news was, it turns out that my son's issue resolved and wasn't a major issue. But before we found out that news, all these managers from other companies said, Dean, why don't you buy Scott's business from his widow and help her out, and we'll all support you with our needs, job orders, et cetera. And that's what I did. So I recruited for 2 years. I know people that love that job, make tremendous amounts of money doing that job, but it just really wasn't for me. I did quite well at it, but I'm an out on in the field kind of person. Like to be in front of customers, and sitting behind a desk with a headphone on all day for 12 hours wasn't really my bag. But again, I developed a whole new appreciation for recruiters and what they do. They work tremendously hard. And I also know, in addition to the bias out there against pharmaceutical reps entering medical sales, there's also a terrible angst and almost hatred out there of pharmaceutical reps against recruiters. Some of the things you see online is quite vile and angry. And I can just tell you that these are just human beings like all of us that are just trying to make a living. And it's quite the paper chase. You've got to be fast. You've got to be good. You've got to find great candidates. And as salespeople, and pharmaceutical sales is a great profession. It's a respected profession, but it's different than medical sales. But as a sales rep, that if your customer is telling you they want pepperoni pizza, and every day you keep trying to sell them margarita pizza with pineapple, eventually they're not going to buy from you anymore. And so you really have to provide your customers, uncover their needs, find out what they are looking for. And that's the challenge I think recruiters face. That's the challenge I faced during the 2 years that I did it, is you'd have managers tell you what they want. Oftentimes they say, I want somebody with no more than 2 jobs out of college, with track records of President's Club and winning awards. And so no job hoppers, somebody that has a history throughout their life of success and taking on additional responsibility, and no pharmaceutical reps. So if you keep sending them resumes and having discussions with them about pharmaceutical reps, eventually you're going to end up with no customers. So it's an unfortunate part of the business because later on in my life, in my career, I came to the realization, and I don't know why it took me so long, but there are great people in every industry. So I had an opening for Cordis, a company that I actually was regional manager for prior to getting into recruiting. And one of the managers there gave me his job order and said, basically gave me the background that I just mentioned and said, no pharmaceutical reps. So when I posted the job, immediately I got a phone call and a resume from a guy, we'll call him Ben. Ben was quite a charismatic guy, he still is. And he proceeded to try to convince me. Somehow he got me on the phone because it's almost impossible to return the calls. That's the other thing. Recruiters get thousands of resumes a year. Could be 10,000, 20. I mean, if they post jobs, they're going to get hundreds of resumes, and oftentimes only a handful actually fit the qualifications they asked for. But somehow Ben got me on the phone, and he proceeded to sell me on why he was the man. And I said, listen, the manager doesn't want pharmaceutical reps. And he proceeded to tell me about all the physicians he worked with, cardiologists, and all the things that he had done. And, so he did a great job of selling me and extending the conversation. And we really started to delve deeper in his background and who he was. And I started to really believe in this guy. So I set up a more formal interview and we talked again. And, again, I kept stressing to him that the manager really didn't want pharmaceutical sales, but he kept selling. And that's oftentimes what candidates want to do, right? They want to get you on the phone and then convince you that, no, I'm not like any other rep. I'm not like, even though I bounced around, let's say, this is why I bounced around, and they put the hard press on you. And it just really takes up a lot of time that the recruiters don't have. So, but Ben was persistent, and he was so charismatic that I couldn't help but like the guy. And he finally, after a couple of interviews, convinced me to approach the manager at Cordis. And so I did. And immediately the guy said, I'm not interested. I told you I didn't want to see pharmaceutical reps. And I continued to push, and I could tell he was getting a little frustrated. And the conversation ended, and I went back. I said, Ben, the guy just doesn't want to see you. And Ben was relentless, and he continued to strategize with me and try to figure out ways to get him in front of this guy. I even think I had him, maybe, I'm not sure, but bottom line is, after I went back to the manager with some other candidates, I said, listen, I'm telling you, you got to sit down with this guy. He knows everybody in the Inland Empire. He's fired up. He's got a heart of gold. He's passionate, goal oriented. You got to see him. And he relented, and he said, okay, I'll see him. Sometimes, if you push hard enough, you might break through. And so he sat down, and after the interview, I was all excited because I thought the guy would be fired up. And he said, I'm not interested. So Ben, again, was not going to give up. He knew that he was the man for the job. I felt like he was the man for the job. For whatever reason, maybe that first interview, they didn't click. But he was not going to see him. So I pulled out a trick in the old hat that can backfire on you. But I was so confident that this guy was the guy that I told him that he should get the cardiologist in the territory to call the manager and give him a recommendation. And I mean, it sounded like Ben must have gotten every cardiologist, and that's how well liked he was out in the Inland Empire, to call the manager. And finally he said, the manager called me, he said, tell this guy to take the dog, send the dogs off of me, and I'll see him again. So they met a second time. This time, I think that for this manager, that actually said a lot, that he was so connected. And he sat down and he started warm up to Ben, and they started hit it off. And we had to jump through some hurdles through Johnson and Johnson, but in the end, Ben was hired, and I was fired up. It was very exciting, and lo and behold, 6 months later, I never saw this coming. I never expected it. I never expected to go back to work for Cordis, but the new region director heard about me and heard about how I had turned that team around a few years back, and called me and said, "Hey, how'd you like your old job back?" Because they were expanding and they were going to break the region back up into just Southern California. And I really, as I mentioned, recruiting wasn't my bag, so I said absolutely. Everybody thought I was crazy because I came back to Cordis 2 weeks before um, Abbott and I think Boston launched their sirolimus drug stents. And but I came back, and lo and behold, Ben was going to be working for me. And that year, that was probably in the middle of the year, and Ben finished off that year great. And then in the second year, when we were working together, he was sales rep of the year. So I tell you that story because it's really about the person, and I wanted to tell you that story and get it out of the way before I have my special guest on next week. But one other story that I was reminded of, I was speaking to an old friend, Chris Gleason, who is now the vice president of sales of a company that just sounds like they have phenomenal technology relievant for lower back pain. And Chris was a guy that came to me about a job with Intuitive Surgical. And once again, the manager at the time was not really interested in pharmaceutical reps. And Chris called me and said, "But I'm a manager." So not only had Chris just had a phenomenal career as a sales rep, but then he quickly got promoted into sales management. And and that was a great point. And he was so polished, he is such a professional, brilliant guy, a tremendous leader. And so I told the manager, "You got to sit down with this guy." As Chris told me, the next thing I knew, I was sitting down eating mussels or something. About he was talking on the phone with this manager while she was working out or something. But anyway, he landed that job. Just blew it out of the waddle. He blew it out of the waddle, blew it out of the water for Intuitive. Got promoted to be a manager very rapidly, and just went on to. He's just had such an incredible career. And once again, as fate would have it, he and I ended up working together at a Clarent, which was just the 5 greatest years of my medical sales leadership career. I mean, we just had such an amazing time at a Clarent. And Chris was just an amazing manager and did phenomenal there. And so, once again, another example for me that it's about the person. And you can go on and on about these things, but it's not easy, and there is a bias. And on our next podcast, we'll delve into why there is that bias. But anyway, I appreciate you joining me here today. That's Deerfield Beach, Florida, behind me, a place my wife and kids love to go. I'm from Florida originally, and you can see why I enjoy it so much. But what I'd like you to do is click below, go to MedConnect 180, and if you're a pharmaceutical rep or a B2B rep, or really if you're already in the industry, we've got a phenomenal course, again, with some of the industry leaders that will share some of their wisdom. And there you can get the free guidebook, How to Enter the Lucrative World of Medical Sales. It's all part of the package. And so try it out. If you're not happy, you get a 30-day money-back guarantee. But let me tell you, it's phenomenal. And we hope you'll join us. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.